Very much, Kathleen, and welcome. So, to begin with, I'm just very touched by being asked to be one of the speakers in the seminar series that have been sponsored by our center. As a co-founding mother of the center has a very warm spot in my heart. And I'm very appreciative about what the center has done, not only for all of us here and many of the scholars and our graduate students and undergraduate students, but also for the university. The center has been a voice about these issues and a place to provide information and guidance, I hope, for the administration and our faculty. So thank you, Center. So today, really, I'd like to speak and address the topic of spiritual development of college students that is represented in a longitudinal study of 7 years in the making. Actually, the book really culminated after years of work, data collection and analysis, and you can see finally it came out, and it's a time for celebration for my co-authors who are in the audience, Alexander Astin and Jennifer LIttleton. The three of us have worked together with a number of graduate students preparing this book that I would like to share what we learned from this study to share with you this afternoon. To give you a little bit of a background, because some of you might wonder what I, as a feminist scholar who spent more than 3 decades of my work and scholarship on gender issues, how did I get involved in studying the spiritual development of college students? It was actually about 10 years ago, to be more precise, it was 1957, when the Fetzer Institute in Michigan invited a small group of faculty and administrators to dialogue about issues of authenticity, wholeness, and renewal within higher education. Those dialogues were very meaningful for all of us who were present there, and a small group of the participants decided to develop like a steering committee, write a white paper, and then begin this dialogue at national conferences of the major associations within higher education. And what we learned really that there was a thirst, a hunger from the audience and the participants to have these conversations, to learn more, and to become more reflective about issues of spirituality in higher education. So, as I said, we did that at various conferences. Also, Sandy, Astin, and I got a very small grant from the Fetzer Foundation to do a small study of faculty to see, can this be studied? Can we really learn from faculty about some of these issues? And we were fortunate to interview about 70 faculty and really hear from them some of the issues they were confronting about sometimes how we can be inauthentic within the academy, how we keep sort of our spiritual life completely separate from our work within the academy. So anyhow, when the Templeton Foundation approached us with a proposal that we write, a proposal to study the spiritual development of college students, we welcomed that idea because we were already very interested in learning more about this aspect of students' lives. So they came to us, as I said, asking us to do that, and we did it, and the project began, housed at the Higher Education Research Institute, which is part of the Graduate School of Education and Information Studies. So we're grateful to the Institute, to the Graduate School, as well as, of course, to the Templeton Foundation. In beginning the study, the first, of course, issue for us was, what are the questions we really would like to address? What do we want to learn? So the first question that we posed that sort of moved us in the design of the study was, what role does spirituality play in the lives of college students? What is the relationship between spirituality and religiousness? And I'll return to that shortly. How do students' spiritual qualities change over time? Remember that this was designed, and I'll say more about that, as another year. That can aid was spirituality that can our work. To do that, we did a lot of homework. We read the extant literature on how others have defined it. We read some studies, primarily small studies done in small institutions, but we became knowledgeable about the studies. We had a wonderful panel of advisors, all scholars in this area of religiousness and spirituality, who guided us, a technical advisory panel. As I said, we did our homework, and finally, based on what we learned from the field in our own deliberations, among ourselves and with the guidance of the panel, we came up with a definition. Let me show you what were the essential elements of this definition. And also, as I showed, let me also define it in a little more extensive way for you as it appears in our book. Spirituality points to our inner, subjective life as contrasted to objective domain of observable behavior and material objects that we can point to and measure directly. Spirituality also involves our affective experiences, at least as much as it does our reasoning or logic. More specifically, spirituality addresses our most inner values, values that we hold dear, our sense of who we are and where we come from, our beliefs about why we're here, the meaning and purpose that we see in our work and our life. It also, it's defined in terms of the sense of connectedness to each other and to the world around us. Spirituality also has to do with aspects of our experience that are not easy to define or talk about. Such things as intuition, inspiration, the mysterious, and the mystical. And finally, we believe that highly spiritual people tend to exemplify certain personal qualities such as love, compassion, and equanimity. On the other hand, we see religiousness as involving adherence to a set of faith-based beliefs and related practices concerning both the origins of the world and the nature of the entity or being that is believed to have created and governed the world. Religiousness typically involves membership in some kind of community of fellow believers and practitioners, as well as participation in particular kinds of ceremonials or rituals. Well, what were the guiding principles for us in trying to find a way of measuring what we mean by spirituality and religiousness? Of course, since we were going to do a very large study, which is usual in our studies at the Institute, the only way we could approach it was by the development of a survey questionnaire. Not an easy thing, but that was the way of reaching a large number of students. So we had some guiding principles that helped us structure the questions for this survey. We wanted to develop a questionnaire that it can be taken by any student, independent of her or his religious affiliation. We wanted atheists, agnostics, as well as devout religious students to be able to respond to it. So that was quite a task. We try not to make the questions so restricted and based in terms of our own sort of Judeo-Christian perceptions. We try to avoid the word God as much as we could and talk more of a higher power. We also try not to use words like Bible or Quran and talk about sacred texts. So we really wanted students to find their own voice in this survey. In doing the questionnaire also we examined the large body of scales of religiousness primarily and some of spirituality. There is a compendium of 125 scales. So we became knowledgeable of what was out there, but we could not really use any of those. So they guided us, but we could not use them. So we did develop our own survey, which consisted of 170 items around issues of spirituality and religiousness. And we had identified a number of domains under which we really designed the questions. Just to give you an idea of our domains, were things such as spiritual and religious outlook, spiritual well-being, spiritual and religious behaviors, self-assessments about the students' own spirituality and religiousness, and some questions about their own experiences with respect to sort of mystical experiences that fed their spirituality. How did we design, once we did the survey, we constructed the survey questionnaire, how did we design the study? We first thought we needed to do a pilot study to test the extent to which the questions we devised would work with our students. So in 2003, we surveyed 3,700 students at a small sample of institutions, about 46, but we tried to have diverse institutions. These students were juniors already because we wanted to see also how some college experience might begin to relate to the outcomes in terms of spiritual growth and development. The same year, we went around the country doing focus groups interviews with about 90 students at about 8 or 10 different institutions. In the fall of 2004, after we had a chance to comb the questionnaire and see the answers and redesign some of the questions, but very much adhering the questionnaire, the students' beliefs and values survey, very much adhering to the original design because it worked. So, but at this point, we decided to survey entering college students at 236 institutions, a national sample representative, and really survey 112,000 students. In the spring of 2007, because from the beginning we wanted to be a longitudinal study, we followed up 15,000 of the same students as they were completing their junior year. The Institute, every 3 years, conducts an annual, triennial, we have a triennial survey of faculty in a very large sample of institutions and a very large sample of faculty, about 55 to 60, often 60,000 faculty. And in this particular survey, we included questions about faculty's own spirituality and religiousness, as well as some practices, pedagogical practices, and also what did they think about the role of spirituality within higher education. And we used that faculty data in our analysis because this faculty were also represented in the institutions where we had data on students. And in 2008 and 2009, we interviewed 50 students and faculty. So this, you can see there was an enormous amount of data from which we wanted to learn what really happens in terms of students' spirituality and their role the college plays in their spiritual development. Let me share with you, first of all, what do we learn from the entering college students? What did they tell us about their own spirituality and religiousness? And it's interesting, you know, because when you look at our data over the years, we have seen the students increasing in their materialism, very much reflecting the larger society. So it was very interesting for us to see that in spite of materialism, students had a high degree of interest in spirituality and religiousness. We find that 8 in 10 students, they said they're indeed interested in spirituality. They believe in the sacredness of faith. They see spirituality as a source of joy for them. They are searching for meaning and purpose in life. They do take opportunities that are available to them to discuss these issues with their friends, they find that certain experiences, in a sense, nourish their spirituality, such as witnessing the beauty in nature or listening to beautiful music. Both of those experiences, plus others ones that are included in the questionnaire, they do, in a sense, nurture and nourish their spirituality. What about, and the last item, which is almost 50%, they tell us they do seek actively opportunities to grow spiritually. What about their religiousness? We find that before they start at college, 8 in 10 tell us that they attend religious services. Also, 80% say that they do discuss religion and spirituality with others. And 89 almost tell us that they do believe in God. And 70% they said they pray. So we asked them also, what do they pray for? And it was interesting to us to hear that they pray for forgiveness. Those were the higher percentages. To express their gratitude, they pray for the loved ones. And they also pray to solve personal problems. They also tell us that their religious beliefs, they provide them with strength, support, and guidance. And that they do follow, 4 in 10, they say they do follow religious teaching in their everyday life. What was interesting to us, given the intolerance in our own country as well as in the world, religious intolerance, we found that our students show quite a bit of tolerance of religious, exhibit a great deal of religious tolerance. By the statements they make, that non-religious people can lead lives that are just as moral as those of religious believers. That most people can grow spiritually without being religious. And that people who don't believe in God will be punished. Only 1/3 tells us that that's the case. Another question we posed to our students was, what are your expectations about college vis-a-vis your values and beliefs? What do you like to see the college do vis-a-vis those concerns of yours? 48 said they would like to see the college really support and encourage their expression of spirituality, enhance their self-understanding, prepare them for responsible citizenship, develop their personal values, and provide for their emotional development. So as you can see, our college students, as they come to college, they have high expectations that will meet them with respect to those aspects of their personal development. Also, we had a question that we asked them, what prompted you to go to college? What reasons did you have for going to college? And we find that over half of them, they tell us that a very important reason is to really find their purpose in life. So they are seekers. Now, let me share with you, after a lot of analysis of our data, of our longitudinal data, what did we learn in terms of what kinds of spiritual qualities we were able to extract that describe our students' spiritual life? And what kinds of religious qualities we were able to identify? So given this analysis, we find that 5 religious qualities described in the students include religious commitment, religious engagement, religious social conservatism, religious skepticism, and religious struggle. Religious commitment is an internal quality that reflects the degree to which the student seeks to follow religious teachings in everyday life, finds religion to be personally helpful, and gains personal strength by trusting in a higher power. Religious engagement, an external measure, represents the behavioral counterpart to religious commitment, and it includes behavior such as attending religious services, praying, engaging in religious singing and chanting, and reading sacred texts. Religious social conservatism reflects the student's degree of opposition to such things as abortion, casual sex, atheism, as well as an inclination to proselytize. As it turns out, these first three measures are closely related. So the students who have a strong religious commitment, they also are much more likely to be religiously engaged and to express conservative views. Religious struggle reflects the extent to which the student feels unsettled about religious matters, disagrees with family about religious issues, feels distant from God, and has questioned his religious beliefs or feels disillusioned with their religious upbringing. Our final religious skepticism reflects beliefs such as the universe arose by chance, or in the future science will be able to explain everything, and a disbelief in the notion of life after death. As you might expect, this measure shows a strong negative association with the first three measures of commitment, engagement, and conservatism. How does religious qualities change during the college years? We find that religious struggle increases during the first 3 years in college. Religious engagement and religious social conservatism decrease. And there is no change in their religious commitment or religious skepticism. Let's now turn to the measures of spirituality we were able to identify. Spiritual quest, equanimity, charitable involvement, ethic of caring, and ecumenical worldview. Those were the 5 qualities that came out of the data in terms of what defines, describes spirituality. Spiritual quest assesses the student's interest in searching for meaning and purpose in life, finding answers to the mysteries of life, and developing a meaningful philosophy of life. The notion of a spiritual quest is clearly reflected in the scale items, all of which begin with the words such as finding, attaining, seeking, developing, and becoming. Equanimity indicates the extent to which the student feels at peace, feels centered, is able to find meaning in times of hardship, and feels good about the direction of her life. We believe that equanimity may well be the prototypic defining quality of a spiritual person. The last 3 qualities reflect the student's sense of relatedness to others. Charitable involvement, that is a behavioral measure, and includes activities such as participating in community service, donating money to charity, and helping friends with personal problems. Ethic of caring, an internal measure, assesses the student's degree of commitment to values such as helping others in difficulty, reducing pain and suffering in the world, and making the world a better place. And finally, ecumenical worldview indicates the extent to which the student is interested in different religious traditions, seeks to understand other countries and cultures, feels a strong connection to all humanity, and believes that love is at the root of all great religions. If one were to define now spirituality based on these 5 qualities, we would go something like that. Spirituality is a multifaceted quality that involves an active quest for answers to life's big questions, spiritual quest. a global worldview that transcends ethnocentrism and ecocentrism, ecumenical worldview, a sense of caring and compassion for others, ethic of caring, coupled with a lifestyle that includes service to others, charitable involvement, and a capacity to maintain one's sense of calm and centeredness, especially in times of stress. The spiritual qualities that increase over time, that is between freshman and junior year, include spiritual quest, equanimity, ethic of caring, and ecumenical worldview. The only one that does not increase, or that shows also a little bit of a decline, is charitable involvement. And we have interpreted that to mean that students come to college overwhelmed, they work, they study, they use a lot of technology, so there is very little time to express their charitable involvement. So that was higher during high school. Well, as I said earlier, one of our biggest questions really was, well, what does college do, and does it do anything to help, to encourage or discourage, to inhibit or aid in this development? We find that faculty's role is very important in student spiritual development. If faculty indicate or exercise actually a direct encouragement by encouraging students and facilitating conversations with students about issues of purpose and meaning in life, or if they encourage discussions about spiritual and religious matters, this kind of direct encouragement increases students' spiritual development. We also find that faculty's pedagogy plays a critical role. Aspects of their pedagogy that seem to encourage and increase spirituality are engaging students in reflective writing and journaling, in collaborative group projects, and in contemplative practices in class. If you look at some of these variables really, or these practices, pedagogical practices, at least I was reminded of many of our discussions about feminist pedagogy that includes encouraging students to do more reflection and to do more collaborative work. So again, what we see here is faculty who are very student-centered in their pedagogy are much more likely to enhance student spiritual development. We also find that engaging or measuring in certain areas plays a role in student spiritual development, and it would be interesting to have an exercise of you guessing, but I'm not going to that. We find that the positive fields in terms of encouraging students in spiritual development are the fine arts, the health professions, the biological, and the social sciences. On the other hand, where we see negative effects are engineering, mathematics, physical sciences, and other technical fields.
Business.
Actually did not come in business. So it was much more, and I think it has to do with business can be sometimes other-oriented rather than technically oriented. That it involves people interactions more so. What about some other positive influences? Curricular, co-curricular, and extracurricular influences of spiritual development. Practices such as meditation and contemplation and reflection are all important practices in students' spiritual development. We find service learning, something that is happening more and more, thankfully, in our higher education institutions, courses that involve community learning, who also, we have called it about service learning, plays a strong role in spiritual development. Charitable giving, even though students have lowered their charitable involvement, we find that if they exercise their philanthropy by giving money to charity, that indeed plays a role in the spiritual development. It's something for us to think about it. How do we encourage students to indeed become generous and become philanthropists, basically. Interdisciplinary courses also play a role in spiritual development, as well as study abroad. Interracial interaction came in each one of our analysis when we looked at every single one of our development of spiritual qualities. Interaction with students of other ethnic backgrounds and racial backgrounds. So that's again, when we talk about the importance of having a diverse campus, think about it, how it also affects students in other dimensions of their personal development. Leadership training and students belonging to student organizations. So when you look at all these variables, or all these experiences rather, stop talking about variables, what we see is that really students who have opportunities to encounter the other, somebody who is different than we are, either through study abroad, or even exposing themselves to interdisciplinarity, seeing different perspectives, interracial interaction, or being in the community through their classes. All of these experiences, what it helps them do, as you can see, is become more reflective and recognize the importance of values and beliefs. Some negative influences, and again, you're not going to be surprised, watching a lot of television, playing video games, and doing a lot of drinking and partying. Okay, no surprises. You know, another very critical question for us to think about is, oh well, spiritual development, important, addresses students' inner values, beliefs. Do by helping students to develop spiritual, does that help the growth of other outcomes that we value in college, such as academic performance as one, for instance? What do we find? That growth in equanimity promotes academic achievement, as reflected in the GPA, psychological well-being, leadership self-concept, satisfaction with college, and the ability to get along with persons from other races and cultures. We also find that other qualities that we have identified promote aspirations for advanced degrees, that is going to further education, and a commitment to promote racial understanding. Of course, the next question for us was, what can we do? How can we assist colleges in promoting spiritual growth and development? Let me say parenthetically that a lot of the curricular and co-curricular activities that promote spiritual development are indeed things we're doing. We're doing service learning. We are developing our interdisciplinarity and interdisciplinary studies. I don't know how far we're going with studies abroad, but it's happening using universities. We encourage, I hope, interracial interaction. It's inevitable in our campuses today. All of these are happening. I think they can happen to a greater extent and more intentionally. I think we have to begin to make the connections, really, of how what we're doing with all these curricular and co-curricular efforts develops the whole student, provides for a holistic education. But also, we have to do something else that we don't do. And that is encourage, allow, and provide opportunities for students to become more reflective, more contemplative about themselves and their lives. And I have to tell you that what we are learning, and I'll address that a little more, is that now campuses are beginning to design spaces for students that they can do this meditative and contemplative work. And big institutions like Florida State University, we visited, and they were just building a park where they were designating spaces for students to go there and do some reflective and meditative and contemplative work. Our neighboring institution, UCI, they have in their budget a request to create a specific space for meditation and contemplation. So this is happening, and it's a welcome idea for us, since we're promoting this kind of work, to have really students, and the students told us more than once in our interviews, there is no time for reflection. Between the pressure of the work, working for money, and the technology, texting, listening, they said, the students said, the only time I can reflect is when I go to bed, and then I'm exhausted. So you see, we do not provide intentionally opportunities for students to do this kind of reflective work. So to begin to discuss this with a larger community, we brought 10 institutions to campus, a very diverse sample of institutions, and they sent a team of 4 members of their campus to come here to UCLA for a National Institute of Spirituality and Higher Education. And after we talked about some of our findings, we deliberated what can institutions begin to do really to promote spirituality. And these are some of the recommendations I'd like to share with you. Offer opportunities for discussions about issues of meaning and purpose during student orientation. That's a time, it's an opportunity for us to do it, as well as other programming initiatives. We have things like freshman year experience, sophomore year experience. We begin to think of special packaging of opportunities, and those are times that we can begin to introduce these conversations. Another one is, to, as I said earlier, to establish places for reflection and quiet dialogue on campus. Incorporate discussions of spirituality in living and learning communities and residence halls. One of the institutions that has started doing some very good work along these lines is Carnegie Mellon University. What they have introduced a program, they call it the Big Questions Program. And they have invited senior faculty, and we met some of these faculty, and they're primarily, believe it or not, hardcore scientists. They go in the residence halls, and they meet with students about big questions. And when some of them, they read a book and they reflect the book, a book that is inspiring. As they ask the students, what are some of the big questions you're dealing with? And some of the questions they said, what is love? Tell me about life and death. Or why a loving God is there, supposedly, and we have so much pain. My mother died last year. So things that students struggle with. And this faculty have opportunities to talk with students in residence hall. Nobody, the faculty doesn't get it, bless them, and the students don't get credit. But they get really credit in terms of the kind of satisfaction that they all have as a result of these experiences. Bringing host guests as speakers and to hold forums to encourage this discussion. Or create professional development programs to prepare faculty, staff, and peer leaders to participate in and facilitate discussions on spiritual issues. So, before I show you this, but feel free to copy it if you want more information about the study, more details about the design and the questionnaires and everything else. Or you can go to a newly created website, the Cultivating the Spirit, on which we post blogs and we welcome discussion. Hopefully, I don't know how it's going to evolve. I'm still learning this technology. But before I close, I wanted to say that another thing we have been doing is, not only we wanted to have the recommendations I shared with you, but we wanted to go out there and find out what exactly are institutions doing that we can learn from each other. What are they doing in a curricular and co-curricular way that promotes spirituality? So we sent out a call all over the country to over 1,000 institutions, and we got responses from a large number of them. And right now, with the leadership of Jennifer Lindholm, we're putting together a compendium where it lists actually exemplary practices in different types of institutions around the country. So we can help this conversation not only to happen, but also help institutions to begin to do something because very often they said, oh, well said, but what do we do next? So hopefully this compendium will be of some help. So I'd like to close here. Thank you all for listening, but most of all, thank my colleague, Chris, who's going to come up here, who agreed to be a respondent, and I'm looking forward to her. Chris and I have a very long history through our common concerns and passion about all of us here, and about gender issues and feminism. So anyhow, thank you, Chris, for agreeing to do that. I'm looking forward to learning from you. And thank you all for listening.
When I was first asked to do this, I thought, oh no. And then I realized that that was exactly the kind of reaction that we have as academics, as teachers, when we're asked to deal with difficult issues or controversial issues in the classroom. And I've taught a number of controversial issues in the classroom over my years. I remember, one of the sources that's cited in Helena's work is Carole Gilligan's work on the way that perhaps there are different modes of developing moral reasoning instead of Kohlberg's single track. That there are other ways of doing. And what's usually not, often her work is cited as, oh, men and women just have different values, right? But what's missing in the discussion is that one of her case studies was about young women facing an abortion decision. And I taught this in an undergraduate course, and we actually looked at the question about whether abortion was, in fact, a moral issue. Now, it's a political issue, it's a moral issue. Does the idea of even calling it a moral issue cede the ground to religious conservatism, or is it possible, in fact, to talk about the morality of making choices in a way that doesn't prejudice the outcome? And I found that, yes, it's possible, and yes, it's difficult. That to be receptive to the closing down aspects of certain dogmas, and yet to try to keep them open, is one of the most difficult things we do as teachers, right? Because there is a closing down of discussion that occurs, but not only when you raise issues of morality. It also occurs when you try to talk about racism, when you try to talk about sexism and about homophobia, if those are used as labels and as ways of shutting down the conversation. The interesting thing about being Vice Provost for Diversity Faculty Development, lots of interesting things about it. Now, I've only had the job since October 1st, so I'm still in the honeymoon period. But one of the interesting things about it is we are, as a public university, constrained by both state law, which says you may not prefer to hire your faculty. You may not prefer a particular candidate on the basis of their sex or race or ethnicity, but also as a federal contractor, we are bound by federal law, which says that diversity in your faculty is a positive goal to be affirmatively sought after and to act in good faith toward creating and increasing diversity. And and so one of the most interesting things is how does it work to increase diversity without making overt preferences based on particular categories? And it turns out that once you actually look and open that conversation, once you stop thinking about, what was the Prop 209, right? Prop 209 as a blanket prohibition, and start thinking about it as opening different doors to valuing diversity, there are lots of ways to increase the diversity, racial, ethnic, religious, and gender diversity on campus that do not involve the kind of preference that shuts down thinking, right? That if what affirmative action was simply adding discriminatory systems, then of course, if you take away the added preference, you get back to, ta-da, discriminatory systems, right? And what this forces us to do, this sort of being in the middle of these forces, these political forces in the state and federal mandates, is really to open up that ground so that the systems themselves change, rather than simply adding to a discriminatory system a little help. So I found this to be a wonderful way of thinking about any of these projects. It's the same thing with, if you come up with, in Gilligan's analysis, what she did was Carole Gilligan set up an impossible situation for the composite person, young person, she identified as female, in which she had to choose between stealing a drug and saving the life of the wife, or not stealing the drug, and both, like letting the Heinz's wife die and stealing something, were both unacceptable. In that unacceptable choices, instead of using it as a math problem, which is one way of doing it, well, life is more important than property, so we should, steal the drug. Right? That's a nice, neat way. Or stealing is just wrong, shut it down, whatever the consequences. Amy, her composite person, is forced to be creative, forced to open up the dialogue, forced to think outside the box. And that's what this, that's what some of these big questions really force us to do. Force us to think outside of those narrow categories, and force us, in effect, to go on a spiritual quest. A couple of things that I found really interesting in this study is the relationship between, on the one hand, the relationship between the inside and the outside, right? Which is something that we all struggle with. What is our inner life, and how is it reflected in our outer action? And I'm reminded often about that little slogan that says, you cannot think yourself into right action, but you can act yourself into right thinking. Is that when I'm looking at some of the data, that what increases internal satisfaction seems to be, in many cases, the action of getting involved with others, the action of connecting, the action of going abroad, taking a different course, finding different information. That is active. It's not a passive. It's not the passivity that too many people associate with either spirituality or religiousness. So that the activity aspect of this was fascinating to me. On the other hand, that spiritual questing increases with community service, or is seen in community service. It helping friends with personal problems and donating money to charity all increase the likelihood that the student will be spiritually questing. So does working, but only part-time. And more, and one of the things, working on campus better than working off campus. That means that every time we're using work-study, we are actually providing that kind of opportunity for our students. Every time we hire a graduate research assistant, we are providing that kind of opportunity. And that's another example of why we should be supporting graduate funding in the form of these research assistantships. And the fact but busyness is destructive to the inner life. Now, how many of us are in fact busy? I don't know about you, but I haven't been able to answer all my email in the same day or even in the same week for years. Right? I constantly am tempted to declare email bankruptcy, and just to say, I'm sorry, everything's gone. Right? Next to chocolate is my biggest temptation. Right? So and yet, every email I answer is a connection, and when I can reframe it in those ways and connect with the person on the other end instead of seeing them as one more demand of my time, and yeah, your question might be really short, but there are 15 ahead of you, and each one takes 3 minutes. That reframing, and that's part of what's done in a spiritual practice, is the reframing of issues so that they're not closed up, so that they are open to that connection. Another thing that I found very interesting was that the thing that grows the most in college, the aspect that grows the most, is the ethic of caring. Ethics of care that's the thing that grows the most out of religious or spiritual development. That is a wonderful thing to find out. Now, it also tracks Gilligan's and Neil Nodding's feminist work or cultural feminist work on ethic of care, that females, score higher on ethic of caring than males. And you can ask, is this acculturated in females? Catherine McKinnon said, of course females care more. We survive by caring, right? That's how we get anything, right? We are forced to care. And Nina Allen said, we have to be careful that women do not care ourselves into oblivion. That we share the caring, but if this can grow in college, without the sort of active interventions, but with these developments in modern education, interdisciplinarity, the attention to study abroad, service learning, and ways of connecting, which is the other thing that really fascinated me about this, is the contemplative and the other regarding. That the characteristics of the spiritual person that they have listed, that they found here: love, compassion, equanimity, 3 of the 4 limitless ones in the Buddhist tradition. That equanimity is the sign of a spiritually developed person, or of a spiritual person. I'm taking that to be someone who has actively developed some spiritual qualities. And yet, equanimity we usually think of as, well, the ability to stay calm and centered under stress, yes, but also as a deeply interior, me, myself alone, against the onslaught of email, right? that we can remain calm and wise under the outside stress. And yet, what equanimity is related to, or is grown out of, is the compassion and the service to others. So that the very notion of an interior, atomized, spiritual person is in fact a contradiction in terms. That the connection, and even the lamas who go into the cave for 7 years, right, to deeply, deeply contemplate and to create that kind of space. Do it. Why? You ask a practicing Buddhist, why do you go for 3 years and not speak and not see anyone? Why? So that I can be of benefit to all beings. Sentient beings are numberless. I vow to save them all, which is the Bodhisattva's vow. Now, that connection between the interior contemplative, the time and energy taken to look inside, and the connection of the outside and to the caring is one of the most wonderful things about this. It's almost like a virtuous circle, right? The more I actually connect in authenticity to others, the more I find out about others who are not apparently like me, but turn out to be human like me, then my interior ability to deal with more otherness grows. So that the racial understanding, the interest in and ability to move in different circles geographically with different people increases at the same time as the interior resources increase. And in fact, it was interesting, you know, when we're looking at the traditional, equanimity leads to better grades. You know, this is a great way to sell this, right? Develop equanimity and your grade GPA will go up. And we have the research to prove it. And then the question comes, okay, here's a chicken and egg problem, right? Is it the ability to maintain focus over long periods of time, to maintain the discipline that comes with contemplative practice that then leads to more study, more effective studying, and therefore better grades? Or is it those who have developed the discipline to study and focus for a long period and the passion in their work to connect with it, who then develop this equanimity or develop the ability to also be contemplative about their own thoughts? There's also one other thing that I just found totally fascinating. Here's the, some of the things were okay. We weren't surprised that a lot of partying and drinking and a lot of video games and television is probably not conducive to the spiritual life, although it's a guilty pleasure of all of us. We all need a little spice to our lives, but the aspiration or the drive to learn more can be strongly affected here, negatively affected by religious engagement. Not religious commitment, but religious engagement. That the religious engagement decreases the drive to move on, to go to graduate school, to move into the professions, to increase your skill set. Whereas the idea of being a global citizenship, of developing the compassion and interest in the rest of the world increases the desire. So if we want students to go into graduate school, we send them abroad, and if we want them not to, we send them to church. So pick which people you want where, and you know what to do. But I think that I also want, I'm also very impressed with UCLA does have. I keep saying to people, UCLA has everything, but you just have to find it, right? There is a whole program on mindfulness and a center that explores and offers classes in mindfulness, right, which is a form of deeply secular meditation, contemplative practice, right here on South Campus, right down there on South Campus, sorry. And there are the staff, various of the human resources folks have developed these yoga classes that are done in different departments for the staff and faculty get to go to if we're good. We get to go free yoga classes. This is a form of active contemplative meditation. The CAPS program, for psychological services, offers not only during exam time, but at other times too, mindfulness-based stress reduction techniques. Because we know that, equanimity allows you to be calm in the middle of stress. Being calm in the middle of stress gives you a better chance not to choke on the exam. That we know. And we also know, we can also start to hook up some things from other work on academic success into these practices. that we know that students in law schools who form a study group and study together do better than students who study alone. Why? They're developing connection and they're learning to see things from different perspectives, which is a key ingredient of being able to do legal analysis effectively and to be a good lawyer. Because, you know, what they say, if there's one lawyer, there soon will be two, because you got to have both sides. This is the full employment for lawyers theory. I won't tell you my favorite lawyer joke, even though it's not dirty and not unkind, but, well, kind of unkind. Anyway, this is a fascinating area. It has just barely been opened up. And I think we could all, so let me quote a Judeo-Christian text, actually a Christian text, it comes from the New Testament. Ask and you shall find. Seek and you shall find. Ask and it shall be answered. Knock and the door shall be opened unto you. Thank you.